Have you ever been in like a really heated argument and you're trying so desperately to stay calm and rational?
Right, you've got all your mental bullet points lined up.
Exactly. You're agonizing over every single word before you say it. But the moment the other person gets just a little bit harsh, your eyes just completely betray you and well up with tears.
Oh, it is the most frustrating feeling. Because biologically speaking, your brain is reacting to a survival threat from, 20 years ago, rather than what's actually happening in the room.
Yes. And the worst part is the other person looks across the table, sees this messy emotional breakdown, and they assume you're, fragile or manipulating them.
Or just completely illogical. When really it's a complete mismatch between what's happening externally and what your nervous system is doing internally.
Which is exactly why, okay, let's unpack this. Today's deep dive is fully dedicated to decoding the emotional crier. We are going to prove that this phenomenon is absolutely not a sign of weakness.
Not at all. It's actually a hidden indicator of profound empathy. Those tears aren't really about the argument itself.
Right.
They're essentially a release valve for years of suppressed emotions and this really deep-seated fear of pushing people away.
I was looking at the biological mechanisms in the sources we have, and there's this fascinating distinction between different types of tears. Because we just assume all crying is exactly the same.
Like water coming out of the eyes, right?
Exactly. But the tears you shed when you're, chopping an onion are chemically different from the ones you shed during a conflict.
That is the crucial starting point here. Reflex tears. So the onion tears are basically just water and antibodies. They're just washing away an irritant.
Okay.
But emotional tears are an entirely different physiological response. Biochemists found that they actually contain high levels of stress hormones.
Wait, really? Like what kind of hormones?
Things like adrenocorticotropic hormone, prolactin, and even a natural painkiller called leucine and enkephalin.
Oh, wow. So the body is literally excreting stress. It's using your tear ducts as a waste disposal system for excess cortisol.
Yes, exactly. Because the system is just overwhelmed. When you're in a conflict, your brain isn't just listening to the words being said.
Right. You're doing so much more than that.
If you are highly empathetic and conditioned to keep the peace, you are running these massive concurrent risk assessments. You're monitoring their microexpressions, analyzing tone, predicting how they'll react.
Actively suppressing your own anger. Right. Just to make sure you don't say something that permanently damages the relationship.
Exactly. The cognitive load is staggering.
It really makes me think of a computer crashing.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Right, because it's not that the computer is weak or broken. It's that you have 99 tabs of empathy open all at once.
Yeah.
You're running background checks on every single phrase before it leaves your mouth. And the CPU just maxes out. The tears are basically just the spinning wheel of death on the screen.
That is exactly what's happening. Yeah. You're internalizing all that intense emotional energy to protect the connection. The tears are literally a byproduct of caring too much.
Caring too much, yeah.
Your nervous system is redlining because you're terrified that one wrong move will result in abandonment.
Which actually brings up a really strange phenomenon detailed in our research, the paradox of kindness.
Oh, this is fascinating.
Because it isn't always the conflict itself that triggers the crash. You can endure a brutal day at work, tolerate rude comments, totally navigate a stressful meeting, and your eyes stay completely dry.
You're just totally locked in.
Right. But then someone hands you a cup of coffee and simply asks with genuine warmth, "Are you okay?" And the dam completely breaks. Why does a tiny act of kindness shatter the mask faster than cruelty does?
Well, we can map that directly to the autonomic nervous system.
Yeah.
All day, you've been operating in a sympathetic state. Fight, flight, or in this case, hypervigilance.
You're basically wearing psychological armor.
Precisely. So when someone is cruel to you, it just bounces off that armor. Because cruelty is exactly what your nervous system was braced to handle.
You're expecting the hit, so your muscles are already flexed.
Yeah. But kindness operates as a biological signal of safety. When someone shows genuine warmth, it tells your brain the immediate threat has passed.
Oh, so it activates the parasympathetic nervous system.
Right, the rest and digest system. Think of your nervous system like a deeply drawn bowstring. The tension has been held at maximum capacity for hours.
And then kindness just removes the target.
Exactly. The tension suddenly drops, the bowstring snaps back, and the physical release of all that suppressed stress is expelled as tears. It's the final straw for a heart that's been holding its breath all day.
Wow. So it's the sudden permission to stop bracing for impact. The kindness doesn't cause the pain. It creates a safe enough environment for the body to acknowledge the exhaustion.
And that physiological release is entirely involuntary. Your conscious mind is still trying to hold the mask in place, but your body steps in and overrides the system to prevent long-term damage from the cortisol buildup.
Okay, let me push back on the underlying premise here just a little bit.
Sure, go for it.
Because I struggle with assigning this highly empathetic, protective framework to every single person who cries during a disagreement. I mean, if someone starts weeping because they're losing an argument, couldn't they just lack basic emotional regulation?
Yeah, it's a very fair question.
Like, how do we definitively separate a deep-seated survival response from someone who, just resorts to a tantrum when they don't get their way?
We have to look at the objective of the behavior. A tantrum, which is a lack of emotional regulation, is inherently demanding. It's designed to force the other person to fix the problem.
Right, the person throwing the tantrum wants you to soothe them or yield to them.
Exactly. They are making their emotions the other person's responsibility.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
But the emotional crier we are analyzing is doing the exact opposite. Their crying is almost always accompanied by intense shame and apologies.
Yes. They're desperately trying to hide the tears.
They don't want you to yield. They want you to ignore the biological reaction so they can finish making their rational point. They aren't demanding external regulation. They are failing at internal suppression.
That is a massive distinction. They're furious at themselves for crying because the tears feel like a failure to protect the harmony of the interaction.
Which points directly to a psychological adaptation known as the fawn response.
Okay, I've heard of fight, flight, or freeze.
Right, in trauma psychology. But fawning is the fourth survival strategy. It's the subconscious attempt to neutralize a threat by being overly accommodating, helpful, and hyper-attuned to what the aggressor needs.
So if your nervous system is defaulting to the fawn response during a routine argument with, like, a partner or a boss, we have to look at where that wiring was installed.
Exactly.
Because nobody is born hypervigilant about the emotional state of a coworker.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we trace that wiring back to environments structured around conditional love. In developmental psychology, we see this frequently in individuals who grew up as the designated good kid in their family.
Or the peacemaker.
Right. Affection, safety, and praise were not freely given. They were transactional. They were rewarded for being quiet, getting good grades, and not adding to the emotional burden of the household.
But wait, isn't being a good kid generally a positive trait? I mean, we're taught that reading the room and not throwing tantrums is emotional maturity. When does being polite turn into a trap?
It turns into a trap when their worth is tied entirely to their utility and compliance. If the caregivers were stressed or volatile, the child learned that their own sadness or anger was dangerous because it might trigger a withdrawal of affection.
So while other kids were allowed to throw tantrums, make a mess, and be comforted by an adult, the listener was busy learning to endure.
Exactly. The good kid completely bypassed that developmental stage. They became miniature adults. They learned to walk on eggshells and read the temperature of a room before entering it.
They shape-shifted to fulfill everyone else's needs before a conflict could even spark.
Yes. They learned to negotiate peace treaties on behalf of everyone else without ever being taught how to advocate for their own borders.
Wow. And that early conditioning creates this tragic reflex in adulthood.
It really does. When interpersonal friction happens today, the brain just bypasses logical assessment. Your first instinct is almost never, am I right? Or did they cross a line?
It's always, did I do something wrong?
Exactly. The immediate involuntary reflex is self-blame.
It creates that recognizable cycle of intense rumination. Like you have a minor disagreement and you spend the entire night staring at the ceiling, analyzing every single word you said.
Replaying the tone of your own voice.
Yes, searching for the exact moment you ruined the interaction. You basically act as your own harshest interrogator, totally determined to find yourself guilty.
Because assuming guilt provides a false sense of control.
Wait, how does guilt give you control?
It's a vital psychological defense mechanism. Think about it. If the conflict is your fault, then you have the power to fix it. You just need to try harder, be more accommodating, or anticipate their needs better next time.
Oh, I see.
The alternative is terrifying. Admitting that the other person is simply being unreasonable or cruel means accepting that you are powerless to control their behavior.
Taking the blame is the price you pay to sustain the illusion that you can keep people from leaving you.
Exactly. And that illusion of control is what keeps the fawn response active for decades. You keep sacrificing your own emotional reality to maintain an artificial peace.
Okay, so if leaning into that good kid role practically guarantees we stay trapped in this cycle of hypervigilance, what is the biological circuit breaker?
Right? How do we stop it in the moment?
Yeah, because recognizing the childhood root is fascinating, but if I'm sitting in a performance review and I feel the tears welling up, knowing about my developmental psychology doesn't stop the physiological flood.
No, it doesn't. And here's where it gets really interesting. The first step in breaking the circuit is actually somatic, not cognitive.
Meaning in the body.
Yes. You cannot logic your way out of a physiological response when your amygdala is overriding your prefrontal cortex. When that sting behind the eye starts, your brain has signaled a survival threat.
So you have to send a counter signal of safety from the body back to the brain.
Exactly.
What does that counter signal actually look like in practice?
It starts with breaking the hyperfocus. When we feel threatened, our vision literally narrows. We zero in on the source of usually the person we're arguing with.
Okay.
Purposefully softening your gaze and engaging your peripheral vision signals to the nervous system that there are no predators in the immediate environment.
Oh, that makes sense.
Combine that with grounding. Press your feet firmly into the floor or feel the texture of the chair you're sitting in. This activates sensory pathways that compete with the emotional flood.
So you're physically pulling your brain out of the 20-year-old trauma loop and forcing it to acknowledge the present reality.
Exactly. But once you've slightly downregulated the nervous system, you have to radically change your relationship with the vulnerability of the tears themselves.
Because the instinct is to hate the crying, right? To apologize for it and try to force it back down.
Yes, but fighting the tears just adds a secondary layer of stress to an already completely overwhelmed system.
The biological reality is that the tears are a rescue mission. Your body is stepping in and saying, I will not let you hold this toxicity in any longer.
That's exactly it.
Punishing yourself for crying is like punishing your lungs for gasping for air when you've been underwater.
That reframe is essential. The tears are not a flaw. They are biological evidence of your body's resilience, a literal way of saving yourself after prolonged suppression.
Right.
Once you stop apologizing for the physiological reaction, you can begin the actual work of setting boundaries.
And for the chronic peacemaker, the concept of a boundary is usually so misunderstood. We tend to view boundaries as ultimatums or acts of aggression.
Totally. We think saying no or I don't like this means we are being cold or selfish, which triggers the exact fear of abandonment we've been trying to avoid our whole lives.
So how do we redefine them?
An ultimatum is an attempt to control the other person. Like, you need to stop talking to me like that. A boundary is an operating manual for yourself. If the conversation continues at this volume, I'm going to step out of the room until we can both reset.
Oh, I like that. You're not demanding they change. You are dictating how you will protect yourself. It's a necessary act of survival.
Exactly. Not everyone deserved your constant apologies.
So how does that apply to the actual moment of crying? If the goal is to stop sacrificing ourselves for the sake of an artificial peace, what is the script when the tears start falling and the other person gives you that dismissive, oh, here we go again, look?
You strip the shame out of the communication. You address the elephant in the room plainly, treating the tears as data rather than a defeat.
Like calling it out directly.
Right. You can say, I'm having a strong physical reaction right now because I care deeply about resolving this, but I stand by what I am saying. Please listen to my words, not my nervous system.
Wow. That is incredibly powerful. You're claiming the tears instead of letting the other person use them to invalidate your argument.
And you are separating your biological response from your intellectual authority.
Yeah.
Most importantly, you are refusing to do their emotional labor for them.
Right, because the default of the highly empathetic person is to assume the burden of making everyone else comfortable.
Exactly. If someone is harsh, you empathize with them. You think, oh, they must be stressed. I shouldn't take it personally.
We spend so much time negotiating peace treaties with everyone else, we end up declaring war on ourselves. We act as defense attorneys for everyone who hurts us while prosecuting ourselves for the slightest misstep.
Yes. You have to take that immense capacity for empathy, that incredible ability to understand why people act the way they do, and turn it 180 degrees inward. The person who desperately needs your protection isn't your partner or friend. It's yourself.
That shift requires us to step down as the universal peacekeeper and finally take up our own defense.
Which means asking yourself a very uncomfortable core question during your next conflict. Are you genuinely working hard to maintain a healthy relationship? Or are you just managing the other person's comfort at the absolute expense of your own reality?
Oh, it's heavy.
It is. But not everyone deserves the version of you that constantly yields.
Synthesizing everything we've pulled from the research today, the narrative really does completely flip.
It really does.
If you are someone who cries out of frustration, who cares entirely too much, and who maps out the emotional terrain of every room you walk into, your sensitivity is not to disease. You are not broken.
You are highly attuned. It's the purest shape of your kindness, your sincerity, and your immense capacity to love. You don't need to force yourself to understand everyone else anymore.
You just need to understand yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Society often conflates strength with being bulletproof or cold or stoic. But true strength is never about the absence of emotion. It is about retaining your gentleness in a harsh environment while finally learning how to protect yourself.
You can be a deeply soft, empathetic person and still have a spine of steel. It's okay if the tears come.
Yes. The victory isn't in stopping the physiological reaction. The victory is in refusing to abandon your own position just because your voice is shaking.
You have to become the stabilizing adult for your own nervous system. When the breakdown happens, the goal is not to immediately fix the external relationship, but to provide yourself with the warmth and validation that the good kid never received.
Exactly. Remember to comfort yourself after the tears fall.
You've spent decades pouring an unimaginable amount of energy into becoming the person everyone else expected you to be. You've anticipated their needs, absorbed their moods, and sacrificed your own peace to keep the boat steady.
So much energy.
So the provocative thought we want to leave you with today to mull over is this. What would happen if, starting right now, you redirected just half of that hypervigilant energy into fiercely protecting the adult who is finally learning to hold their own hand?